The Four Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive by Patrick Lencioni. Picture this. You're the CEO of your own company. You're crushing it, working 80-hour weeks, building something from scratch. Your company pulls in $80 million a year. By any measure, you've made it. But here's the thing that keeps you up at night. There's this other company across town, your rival. And somehow, everything just flows for them. Their clients don't just buy from them. They become walking billboards, telling everyone who will listen. The best talent in the industry? They're not just interested in working there. They're fighting to get in, sometimes even jumping ship from your company. And here's what really stings. Their CEO barely acknowledges your existence. To them, you're not even in the same league. This was Vince Green's reality. He founded Greenwich Consulting and was absolutely haunted by his competitor, Telegraph Partners. He threw money at consultants, trying to crack their code. He analyzed their strategy, their marketing, their financials. Every expert came back scratching their heads. On paper, the two companies were practically twins. Same services, similar prices, recruiting from the same talent pools. Yet Telegraph seemed to glide through challenges that made Greenwich struggle and sweat. What Vince didn't realize was that the secret wasn't hiding in some complex algorithm or fancy strategy deck. It was scribbled on a faded yellow piece of paper, casually taped to his rival's desk. On that paper were 4 disciplines. Just 4. But these 4 disciplines were the obsessions that created an advantage so fundamental, most people couldn't even see it. Today, we're going to uncover those 4 obsessions. This isn't just another business story. It's about leadership, human nature, and the surprising power of getting the simple things right. By the end, you'll understand the crucial difference between a smart organization and a healthy one. And you'll discover that extraordinary success isn't about being the smartest person in the room or having the most complex systems. It's about having the guts and discipline to focus on what actually moves the needle. Our story starts with 2 men who could have been twins, business-wise, Vince Green and Rich O'Connor. Both ran top technical consulting firms, both were workaholics, and both even went to the same business school at the same time. When they launched their companies, they were basically racing side by side. For the first 3 years, both firms exploded with growth, and the 2 leaders maintained a cordial, if distant, mutual respect. They were evenly matched, in balance, until suddenly they weren't. Seemingly overnight, Rich O'Connor's Telegraph Partners just pulled ahead. They started winning all the battles that matter. The top employees, the most loyal clients, the industry's respect and admiration. Vince watched from across the street, consumed by one question: what changed? What was Rich doing that he wasn't? The answer wasn't some brilliant new strategy. It was born from desperation. A few years into running Telegraph, Rich O'Connor was falling apart. The pressure of balancing a demanding business with family life was crushing him. He was missing his son's baseball games. He felt like he was failing everywhere that mattered. He got so close to selling the company he'd built from nothing, just to reclaim his life. Late one night, alone in his home office, ready to throw in the towel, he decided to try one last thing. Instead of trying to do everything faster, he flipped the question. He grabbed a piece of paper and wrote, "What is the one thing I do that really matters to the firm?" He stared at that question for nearly an hour. Then, breakthrough. The answer wasn't one thing, it was 4. 4 fundamental activities, 4 disciplines that were the true heartbeat of his job. He wrote them on a yellow legal pad, and that piece of paper changed everything. It became the blueprint for making his company not just smart, but unshakably healthy. And this is Patrick Lencioni's core insight. Successful organizations have 2 qualities. They're smart and they're healthy. Smart is the stuff everyone thinks about: strategy, marketing, finance, technology. But healthy? That's different. A healthy organization has minimal politics, minimal confusion, high morale, and high productivity. Here's the kicker: health multiplies intelligence. A healthy organization will eventually figure out how to get smarter, but a smart organization that's unhealthy will eventually implode under its own dysfunction. Rich O'Connor had stumbled onto the 4 disciplines that create organizational health. So what were they? Vince would eventually find out from Jamie Bender, a disgruntled Telegraph executive who came looking for a job. Through Jamie's story, we learn the 4 obsessions. The first, and most critical discipline, build and maintain a cohesive leadership team. Sounds like something from a motivational poster, right? But at Telegraph, it was raw, real, and the engine driving everything. Jamie described Telegraph's executive meetings as, quote, internal family feuds. They weren't those quiet, polite, going through the motions affairs. They were passionate, loud, full of fierce debate. People argued constantly. Once, Rita, the head of legal, called Tom the COO an ass during a meeting. In most companies, that's a career-ending moment. It creates political rifts that last for months. But at Telegraph, totally different, because they argued like siblings. 10 minutes after a heated debate, they'd be laughing together. Why? Because their conflict was never personal. It was always about finding the best answer for the company, not protecting egos or turf. This is what defines a cohesive team. They trust each other enough for unfiltered, passionate debate. They're not afraid to disagree, to challenge, to push back, because the relationship is strong enough to handle it. In unhealthy organizations, leaders avoid conflict. They bite their tongues in meetings, then complain to allies in the hallway afterward. This breeds politics. And politics, Lencioni says, is just unresolved issues at the top, trickling down. When leaders don't have the courage to resolve conflict among themselves, they doom their employees to fight messy, unwinnable battles. So how did Rich build this level of trust? He was intentional. His team did things like Myers-Briggs personality assessments, not as silly exercises, but as tools to build a common language. They learned each other's styles, strengths, weaknesses. They knew Tom was an extrovert who tended to interrupt, and they could call him on it without him getting defensive. They understood each other on a personal level, family histories, backgrounds, formative experiences. They got comfortable being vulnerable, or, as Lencioni puts it, getting naked with one another. Because of this trust, they could make decisions quickly, with total buy-in. Even when they disagreed, once a decision was made, they committed as one. This foundation of genuine team cohesion makes all the other disciplines possible. Which brings us to the second obsession: create organizational clarity. Again, sounds like standard corporate jargon, mission statements, values, goals. Every company has these, right? Most are just words on a lobby poster, gathering dust. At Telegraph, clarity was sacred. It wasn't about crafting perfect poetic words. It was about the executive team being in absolute, lockstep agreement on a few fundamental questions. Questions like, why do we exist? What's our core purpose? What are our behavioral values? The few, core, non-negotiable behaviors that define us. What business are we in? And just as important, what business are we not in? What's our strategy? How are we different from competitors? What are our most important goals right now? And finally, who's responsible for what? In most organizations, if you ask 10 different leaders these questions, you'll get 10 different answers. This creates confusion, and confusion leads to wasted energy, inefficiency, and politics. At Telegraph, every single leader could answer these questions virtually the same way. This clarity acted as a North Star for the entire company. It allowed them to make decisions quickly and consistently. There's this fantastic scene where the Telegraph team has to decide whether to move offices. They're running out of space. One option is a satellite office a few blocks away. The other is moving the entire company. The satellite office seems easier and cheaper short term, but Rich guides the conversation back to clarity. Think about our strategy and our history, he says. They discuss the importance of cross-functional teams and breaking down silos. A satellite office would work against that. So they decide to move everyone. Then they have to choose between two buildings. One is a gorgeous palace near the Embarcadero. The other is nice but more functional near the ballpark. They could afford either. But again, they return to clarity. Rich reminds them, it doesn't really fit with our commitment to humility and customer intimacy. They choose the ballpark. The entire complex decision, something that would paralyze most companies for months with politics and debate, took them less than 25 minutes. That's the power of clarity. It eliminates subjectivity and aligns everyone around common principles, allowing the organization to move with speed and confidence. But having clarity at the top isn't enough. You have to get that clarity into the minds and hearts of every single person in the organization. Which brings us to the third obsession: over-communicate organizational clarity. Most leaders have a deep fear of repetition. They're smart people who assume their employees are smart too. They think, I said it once at the all-hands, they got it. They get bored of their own message and want to move on. Rich O'Connor understood a fundamental truth about human nature. People are drowning in information. For a message to stick, it has to be heard over and over again. Lencioni says some experts believe a person needs to hear something at least 6 times before they truly internalize it. So Rich and his team were relentless communicators. They talked about the company's purpose, values, and goals constantly, in new hire orientations, in company-wide emails, in small group meetings. It felt, as Jamie put it, like listening to a grandfather tell the same stories over and over. But it worked. The message became so deeply embedded it became the cultural DNA of the company. They also used cascading communication. At the end of every executive meeting, they'd take 5 minutes to agree on key messages that needed to be shared with the rest of the company. Then each executive was responsible for communicating those exact same messages to their direct reports within 24 hours. Those managers would do the same for their teams, and so on, until the message cascaded through the entire organization. This ensured everyone heard the same thing at roughly the same time, eliminating the rumor mill and creating powerful alignment. Rich was also adamant about one thing: the communication had to be authentic, not slick. He refused to create glossy posters or golf shirts with company values printed on them. He said the minute you make it feel like a marketing campaign, it loses its authenticity. It starts feeling like a slogan, not reality. The authenticity came from leaders living it and talking about it day in and day out. This relentless communication is simple. It's not intellectually difficult, but it requires immense discipline. And it's the bridge that carries clarity from the leadership team to the entire organization. Now for the final piece. How do you make sure all this health and clarity sticks? How do you make it last, even when leaders aren't in the room? That's the fourth and final obsession: reinforce organizational clarity through human systems. This is where culture stops being just an idea and gets baked into the very structure of the company. Lencioni says an organization's culture lives in the way things get done. You have to build your clarity into the non-negotiable nuts and bolts processes that govern people's careers. There are 4 key systems he highlights. First, hiring. Healthy organizations don't just hire for skills and experience, they hire for cultural fit. At Telegraph, the interview process was intense and structured. They used behavioral questions designed specifically to see if a candidate lived the company's core values. And Rich, the CEO, was personally involved in hiring all senior people, acting as the ultimate cultural filter. He knew a single bad hire at a senior level could be like a virus, infecting the health of the entire organization. Second, performance management. Most performance reviews are bureaucratic nightmares that both managers and employees dread. At Telegraph, it was simple and powerful. They used a 1-page form with just a few key questions. What did you accomplish? What will you accomplish next? How can you improve? And on the back, a crucial question for discussion. Are you embracing the values? The form wasn't the point. The point was the 90-minute, one-on-one conversation that every manager had with every direct report, every single quarter. It was a system designed to create communication and alignment not just generate paper trails for HR. Third, rewards and recognition. In a healthy company, you get rewarded for contributing to the company's success and for living the values. Bonuses, promotions, and public recognition were all tied back to the organizational clarity they'd worked so hard to create. No one got promoted at Telegraph, no matter how good their numbers were, if they didn't embody the behavioral values of the firm. And finally, dismissal. Just as you hire based on values, you must also be willing to let people go if they refuse to embrace them. This is one of the hardest things for a leader to do, but it's one of the most powerful ways to reinforce what the organization truly stands for. It sends a clear message to everyone else. We're serious about this. These 4 human systems, hiring, performance management, rewards, and dismissal, are the scaffolding that holds culture in place. They ensure that organizational clarity isn't just a fleeting feeling, it's a permanent, structural reality. So this is the secret Vince Green finally learns. The reason Telegraph was so successful wasn't because they were smarter, it was because they were healthier. Rich O'Connor was obsessed with 4 things: building a cohesive team, creating clarity, over-communicating that clarity, and reinforcing it through systems. And the final, crushing realization for Vince, when Jamie tells him that Telegraph isn't even trying to be bigger than Greenwich, they're turning away business. They're growing exactly as fast as they want to, no faster. They aren't even playing the same game. Vince had spent years of his life in a one-sided war, competing against a rival who wasn't even competing back. His entire worldview shatters. In the end, Vince can't bring himself to adopt Rich's philosophy. His ego is too big. He loves the game of strategy and competition too much to focus on these soft disciplines. He ends up selling his company. It's a tragic end to his obsession, but also a powerful warning. The story ends on a hopeful note, though. Years later, Vince starts a new company, this time with newfound openness to the 4 disciplines he once dismissed. He finally learned that true leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room, it's about being the healthiest. What I find so powerful about Patrick Lencioni's work is its beautiful simplicity. In a world that celebrates complexity, that tells us we need intricate systems and cutting-edge theories to succeed, this book comes along and says, no. You just need to get the human part right. The story of Vince and Rich is a timeless parable. We all know a Vince Green. Maybe we've worked for one. Maybe, in our more frustrated moments, we've even been one. Someone so focused on the competition, on the metrics, on what everyone else is doing, that they lose sight of their own house. They forget that the greatest competitive advantage you can ever have is a group of people, united by trust and clarity, all pulling in the same direction. The 4 disciplines aren't revolutionary ideas. We've heard of teamwork, clarity, communication, and good HR practices before. The genius is in how Lencioni frames them as obsessions. They're not items on a to-do list you can check off once and forget. They're ongoing daily disciplines that an extraordinary leader must be relentlessly focused on, day in and day out. They're the gardening that never ends. For anyone listening, especially if you're just starting to think about your future career or leadership, this is a profound lesson. It tells you that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating an environment where the best answers can emerge. It's about having the courage to foster healthy conflict, the discipline to create unwavering clarity, and the humility to repeat yourself until the message sticks. So what can you do with this, right now? Let me offer just a couple of simple actions. First, think about a team you're on. It could be for a school project, a sports team, a club. Ask yourself, is our team cohesive? Do we trust each other enough to disagree openly? If not, be the one who starts building that trust. The next time there's a difficult issue everyone's avoiding, find a respectful way to put it on the table. You might be surprised at the relief you see on everyone's faces. That's the first step toward health. Second, apply the clarity questions to yourself. Take out a piece of paper and answer them honestly. Why do I exist? What's my unique purpose? What are my 3 or 4 non-negotiable personal values? What's my strategy for this year? What are my most important goals? And what specific actions do I need to take? The clarity this single exercise can bring to your own life is astonishing. It turns vague ambition into a focused plan. That was a summary of The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive by Patrick Lencioni. We've explored the core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a photograph of a beautiful landscape. It can show you the view, but it can't make you feel the warmth of the sun or the gentle breeze. The real magic happens when you experience it for yourself. This book is a story, a fable, and its power is in the way the lessons unfold through the characters' journeys. If anything we've discussed today has sparked something in you, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning concepts, it's about feeling them, and that's an experience that can genuinely change the way you think about leadership and success. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning, and let's keep growing together.